Have you ever had one of those days where you just have had it and the people around you haven't been nearly as supportive as you know they should have been? And you get back to your house and you lean back and you just think to yourself, oh my heavens, life would be so much easier if there weren't any other people on this earth. Sometimes people are difficult, aren't they? They have the power to really suck the life out of you, and they have the power to give you breath. The reality is, which one are they going to choose? I'll never forget the first time I learned that lesson. I was a young 21-year-old emergency medical technician in Salt Lake City, Utah. And not knowing much about emergency medicine, but wanting to learn, I went out on what was probably my second or my third call. I'll never forget the moment we went in on a woman that was struggling to breathe, probably having an asthma attack. And as I walked in, I saw in her eyes this fear, this desire to breathe, but she couldn't get a breath. I jumped into action, doing the few things I knew how to do, checking vital signs and getting an oxygen mask on her. Meanwhile, a paramedic that was with me immediately put a brand new device called a pulse oximeter on her finger, and I could watch as the oxygen was working inside of her and her oxygen levels started to go up. It was the most amazing thing in the world. I had just saved a woman's life for about a minute. Then we put her in the ambulance, got her in the ambulance to take her to the hospital, and en route to the ambulance, I watched the pulse oximeter go in the completely different direction. She was no longer getting the oxygen she needed, and I was terrified. What are you supposed to do? So I immediately checked the oxygen to make sure it was flowing. It was flowing at the highest level it could. I then bent down and I listened to her mask to see if I could hear the oxygen coming out, could hear nothing but her struggled breathing. Didn't know what to do, so I ran my hand down the tube to of the mask, right to the wheel of the gurney. Oh, somebody had put the gurney on top of this poor woman's oxygen tube. I wonder who that was. Probably the other EMT. So I lifted the gurney up, unkinked the hose of the tube, leaned in, and I could hear the oxygen flowing. I had saved the woman again, a second time in just a few minutes. Now, here's the reality. I learned two important lessons that day. Number one, I wasn't a great EMT at that time. And number two, I was starving somebody. Like a lot of us, we tend to kink the hose of the people around us. We make it so they can't get the oxygen they need. They're struggling to breathe. And a lot of us aren't even aware that we were part of the problem. When it comes right down to it, each and every one of us can either give or take the oxygen away from the people in our most important relationships. Think about it. What is it like to be in a relationship with you? What is it like to bring you difficult news? Are you there and are you able to see what I'm saying? Can you hear what I'm saying? Do you feel what I'm saying? And are you with me during my difficult times? Every single one of us needs this oxygen. In fact, Dr. Stephen R. Covey said, when we really understand another person from their frame of reference, it is like giving that person emotional oxygen. Each one of us are craving that emotional oxygen from the people around us. And when we don't get it, we start to starve. And when we're starved, it creates bigger and bigger problems for the people around us. We actually start fighting and flighting and generating a lot of smoke in the space between. The reality that I found is it's not that we're bad people that don't want to try to do this. I think it's more we don't know how to take care of the space between others. There's a Chinese proverb that perfectly captures what we should be doing and focusing on in the space between. It says it's not the bars that hold the tiger in. It's the space between the bars that hold the tiger in. It's not the notes that makes the music. It's the space between the notes that makes the music. If you go to the zoo, to the tiger exhibit, and when you get there, there are bars, but the bars are 4 feet apart, I'd get out of there. I would skedaddle because you're just an appetizer for a tiger. You see, bars are irrelevant if they're not spaced effectively. It's not the bars, it's not the things that make the difference in our relationships. It's what's happening in between the things that makes the difference. It's not one spouse or another spouse that's the problem. It's what happens between the two spouses that's the problem. It's not the parent or the child that are the problem. It's what happens between the parent and the child that becomes the problem. It's not a Republican or a Democrat that's the problem. It's what happens between Republicans and Democrats that create the problem. It's the space between, and none of us pay attention to it. But I want you to know the space is real and that it matters. What happens between you and others matters. And if you don't take care of the space is going to start to create problems for you. It starts to create what I call smoke. Once the fight or flight kicks in, the smoke starts to come up in the space between. A perfect example of what can happen in the space between and where it gets clouded up with smoke came between two of my clients, Mike and Carla, many, many years ago. They came in and they were literally on the verge of divorce. I asked them, what's causing the divorce? Mike immediately said, a $400 purse. Carla just bought a $400 purse. It's ridiculous. Nobody needs an expensive purse. Carla was mad. She said, it's not a purse, Mike. It's a bag. He said, I don't care what you call it. Nobody needs an expensive bag. She said, oh, really? How much was your golf bag? Right then, by the way, Mike went deaf. He couldn't hear anything. And he's like, what? What are you talking about? Why are you bringing up my golf bag? She said, you just bought a golf bag, and I know it was a lot of money. How much did you spend? I don't know. It was $3 something. $3 what, Mike? $3 what? I don't know, $370. You spent $370, and you're mad that I spent $400? $370 is $400. No, it's not. It's $370. And they went back and forth. And I'm sitting there thinking, what are they fighting about? They're fighting about $30? When you're fighting about how you round a number, you are in the smoke. All of a sudden, Mike came back with some big retort to protect this. I need an expensive bag because I put like $2,000 worth of clubs in the bag. Oh boy, I thought, Mike, what a dummy. Shut it. Just shut it. Listen. Right then, scariest moment of my life. In fact, I can't even remember all of the details. All I remember is right then, Carla's head spun all the way around and fire shot out her eyes, and she talked like this. And she said, you always did love golf more than me. What's the real issue? Do you see how the smoke takes over? Now, I know you don't ever do that, but some of your friends and neighbors do. The smoke kicks in and the fight or flight takes over, and we never get anywhere. The number one killer of people in a house fire is the smoke. The number one killer of the space between is when we get caught up in the smoke instead of getting down to the fire. The smoke is everything that we fight about that's not the real issue. It's the stuff that irritates us. It's the stuff that separates us. It's the stuff that suffocates us that's not the real issue. Wherever there's smoke, there's fire. The fire are the real relationship issues that are at play. Every human being has what I call the starved stuff, the 7 basic needs that need to be met. We have to feel safe, trusted, appreciated, respected, validated, encouraged, and dedication. When those needs are met, we feel like we have oxygen. When those needs aren't met, we start to suffocate. And when you're suffocating me, I'm going to feel compelled to suffocate you. That's what creates the problem in the space between. The fastest way to cut through it is to get real in the space between. Get real is an acronym of the 4 principles we all need to learn to bring in the space between us and the people we care about. We need to learn to recognize their emotion. Every human being has emotion. It comes from the Latin word emovere, which means to move. Our emotions are supposed to move us, and we as human beings are supposed to pay attention to the emotions of others. When we recognize their emotion, we can use those emotions to understand the people better. But when we react to their emotions, we just cause more fight or flight. To recognize another person's emotion is like checking their vital signs. Just like physically, a person that can't breathe, their body will show physical signs of trauma and problems. Emotionally, our body does the exact same thing. When someone is struggling with emotional issues and we pay attention to it, we can see that that person needs our focus, needs our care, and needs attention. To truly connect to another person is to recognize their emotion. And when somebody knows that you recognize their emotions, they know that you see them. When I can see you and not react to you, we can start to create a really powerful space. The second principle is to explore their story. Every human being that has an emotion has a story behind it. Many don't want to share it because they're afraid or they've never had a safe place to share it. But each and every one of us want to have our voice heard. We want our voice to be in the conversation. When we explore another person's story, we're telling them, I hear you. When I can share my story with another and you can hear it, it does a bunch of powerful things that clears the space up. It lowers my emotion because I get to share my words. It increases your understanding because you get to feel and understand me better. It helps you understand my past, my present, and my future. Many of our biggest fights in the present are coming from unexplored stories from the past that have never been safe enough to share. We need to be able to hear the people around us by exploring their story better. The third principle is to attend to their starved stuff. Behind every single emotion and every story, there's a starved issue. And human beings are craving to get somebody willing to go deep with them to understand their needs. To truly understand another person's need is not necessarily a hard thing. It's something we're all wired to do naturally. Every single one of us have mirror neurons, which makes it so my brain mirrors your brain and your brain mirrors my brain, which when we get connected and attuned to one another, and I am dialed into you, I can feel what you're saying. I can feel it inside of me. That's why when you see somebody trip in front of you, you startle. That's why when you see someone smile, you want to smile. That's why when somebody starts to cry, you might feel the need to cry, because we are attuned. We are effectively one. When I can step down and hold your most important needs and understand them and be influenced by them, that's what attending is all about. And when that happens, you know that I can feel you. The fourth principle is to lift the space between. Every one of us has power in the space with another person to either lift that moment to a higher level or lower it. It's up to us where we want to take the conversation. So before you begin to enlighten everybody with your brilliance, make sure first you've recognized the emotion, you've explored and attended to them. Then you can share what you really need to share. The power of sharing comes because I can show you where we're together. Before I try to blow up your idea, I first want to show you where I'm with you. I believe of the biggest issues we're all fighting about in this world, if we actually sat down and talked about it, we'd have about 80% agreement and 20% disagreement. And yet we spend 100% of our debate where we don't agree. Can I just suggest in the space with other people that you always focus first on where you agree, on where you are together? Wouldn't that have been powerful if Mike and Carla could have recognized what the other was saying? What if Carla could have recognized, I understand the purse seems like a lot. And what if Mike could also agree and admit and apologize to coming off as strong as he did? What if they could have more deeply explored, what do you mean when you say golf is more important to me than you? Help me understand that. Do you see the power that comes when you're able to lift a conversation? In the end, we are all struggling in the space between. In the end, we are all wanting to have nothing more than somebody to see us, somebody to hear us, somebody to feel us, and somebody to be with us. The reality is, it's up to us to make that happen. An excellent example of what we can do to create the right spirit in the space between is Aesop's fable of the north wind and the sun. They were in this competition to decide which element was most powerful. They devised this plan to see whichever element could first get the cloak off of this poor passerby would win the battle. The sun went behind the clouds, the wind came out, got into the space between with this poor man and just started to blow and blew cold, freezing wind down on the man. And the more the wind blew down on the man, the more the man turned against the wind, the more the man held tighter to his cloak, and the more the man fought against it. Time and time again, the wind could not ever get the cloak off this poor man until finally the wind gave up and went away. The sun came out, entered the space with the man, and gently, warmly started to influence the space with that poor man and took care of him, understanding his needs, and gently, warmly recognized, explored, attended, and lifted. And in so doing, the man finally got hot enough on his own accord. He removed his cloak, giving the victory to the sun. I believe truly in the end, we all need to be more like the sun. We need to bring that warm energy to the relationships that we have. We need to see people more clearly. We need to hear people more wholly. We need to feel people more sincerely. And we need, of all things, to lift the conversations around us. Think about it. What would this world be like if each and every one of us could just lift one relationship? How much better could our marriage be? How much better could our relationships and family be? How much better could this community be? It's up to us. So I challenge you. Please think of one relationship that you know needs more oxygen. Think of one person that you know needs to have their life elevated. And I challenge you to either share this message with them or on the sly, start creating a safer space for that person. I promise, as you recognize their emotion, explore, attend, and lift, you will see a powerful change that takes place. I promise you that as you do so, you'll let your relationships breathe. Thank you.